What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today we have a very special deck tech video for you. We're going to be talking about all the decks that have potential for set championships. I'm not saying that there are no other decks that you could play. I'm saying that these 7 decks are what you are most likely to see and what you should be looking to build against. So if you're trying to build off meta, I would focus on trying to beat these 7 decks. They are tremendously different, so trying to build any deck that focuses on beating all of them seems impossible. We're even going to be looking at the matchups between these decks and each other, and most of the time it's kind of a flip of the coin, but there are some that have clear winner matchups. So we're going to be talking about that and helping you to decide what deck you should play and what your best matchups are going to be. So definitely stick around, and before we jump into it, I just want to say a big thank you to our Patreons who support all of the giveaways on the channel. Please keep that in mind. All of the funds coming from Patreon are going directly back into giveaways. So if you want to help support giveaways on the channel, if you want to see more giveaways on the channel, joining the Patreon is an awesome way to do it. And definitely give a thank you to those guys in the comments below, because they are the ones that are supporting the giveaways right now. We are not making any money off of YouTube, so Patreon is everything right now. Thank you guys so much for the support. But without any further ado, let's jump into today's decks. So the first deck we're going to talk about is going to be Ruby Sapphire Sisu, is what I call it. We are running a few different Sisus. I am playing the 3-cost Sisu, the 1/4 that quests for 2 and has strength equal to the number of cards in your opponent's hand. Right now that's a major staple in Ruby Amethyst, so it's important to have that answer to it. They're going turn 2 Flynn, turn 3 Sisu to have the strongest character on board to start gaining lore off of their Flynn Rider frenemy. But if you have a Sisu of your own, you can potentially prevent that, especially if they have more cards in their hand than you do in your hand. So it's a little bit of a control game. You don't want to be drawing too many cards if you're going for that kind of move in the early game, but it is definitely a fantastic option to have. She's also potentially a shift target for the big Sisu. I do also run one of the 3-cost uninkable Sisu, really good with ice block. I don't think she's worth more than a 1 of. And I do have 3 Bell. I think Bell really shines in the Ruby Sapphire build, even more so than the Sapphire Steel build, just because you are even kind of more focused on ink ramp, in my opinion, with this deck. You do have some bigger bombs like Maleficent. You are generally trying to get more ink overall. We're not going to talk about every single card in this deck. There's stuff that I think everyone's playing, like Grandma Tala, Hiram Flaversham. Like, we know these cards. Tala's going to come down and let you draw a couple cards. Well, let you draw 1 card and look at 2. Hiram is going to come down, banish an item, draw some cards. Maui, the biggest rush attacker in the game. I think everybody's familiar with him. Madame Medusa or Lady Tremaine could be good in this position. I do think Tremaine is potentially better against the Bucky matchup than Medusa is, but Medusa is definitely really good. Then we do have 1 Ariel. Fantastic card, mainly looking for that activation off Lucky Dime. She does have Ward, so you can kind of take advantage of that where she can't be targeted, so they're looking at having to do a board wipe to get rid of her. Then we do have 3 of our big Sisu, 5/4 for 8, quests for 3, and when it comes into play, it's going to go ahead and get rid of all of the characters with 3 or less strength. So great option to banish characters on your opponent's side of the field, kind of a one-sided board wipe. She did kind of replace Scar during this set. During the last set, you saw a lot of people playing Scar. Now people are switched over to Sisu. Then we do have our Tamatoas, our Maleficents to clear the boards. Some of our low drops like Develop Your Brain. Brawl is a card that got big in the meta. This set, banish a character with 2 or less attack. Definitely a 4 of. 1 jump ahead, always a 4 of. That is only your only turn 2 drop in the deck at all. You just want to kind of heavily mulligan for 1 jump if you can. We have 2 How Far I'll Go. I definitely see the argument for playing 4 of this card. I did 2 in my build. 1 Be Prepared because we are more focused on the Sisu. And then we do have 3 ice blocks. Go ahead and reduce your opponent's attack so that you can get them off of the board with your big Sisu, with your little Sisu, with the brawls, with the Madame Medusa. Makes ice block really good. That's also a big reason we're playing Medusa over Tremaine. We do have 4 Popsicle. Some of my tech options I'll talk about last, but we have 4 Popsicle, 4 Fishbone Quill to go ahead and ink ramp, and then the Lucky Dimes to take advantage of lore triggers immediately when characters like Tamatoa and Ariel come onto the board. And then as kind of tech options, I am running 2 Maui's Fish Hooks, so that is a 3-cost inkable, and if you have a character named Maui into play, it doesn't cost anything to activate its ability, but if you don't have Maui in play, then you pay 2 and exert the card, and you're going to be able to give a target character +3 attack or evasive until the start of your next turn, which is fantastic, because you can keep your characters from getting attacked into, like your Belle and your Tamatoa potentially, and you can also boost up the attack of something like Maui or something else to bust out locations, to blow away Tamatoas on the opposing side, and then if it does get destroyed, you can recur it with your own Tamatoa, so I think it's a great card. And then another card that's really great specifically for the recursion with Tamatoa is Fang Crossbow. I think this is a card that's not getting enough love, especially in the Ice Block Sisu Medusa build. So Fang Crossbow is going to have exert and give an opposing character -2 attack, so even more than you're able to give with Ice Block. It is an inkable, it costs 3, and it does also have exert. I think it's exert and banish this item, and banish chosen dragon character, so super relevant right now with Sisu being such a big deal in the meta and those maleficent dragons. So you can go ahead and blow them right away with Fang Crossbow, and then quest in with Tamatoa or play a Tamatoa from your hand, get the crossbow back from your banish pile, and then play it again and keep blowing up those dragons, or keep giving stuff -2 and getting it out of your way with Brawl, Medusa, etc. So Fang Crossbow is a card I think that's not getting enough love, and it's just fantastic in this deck. So that is Ruby Sapphire Sisu. Some of the best matchups for Ruby Sapphire are going to be into Sapphire Steel and Emerald Steel. The bigger removal package can sometimes just kind of overwhelm Sapphire Steel, and their wheels are generally benefiting you as the Ruby Sapphire player because you're always looking for more card draw. And then into Emerald Steel, as long as you can get some ink going relatively quickly and start filling your hand up, and they don't discard it all away, you're going to be in a fantastic position to board wipe and just kind of take over into the late game and definitely win that matchup. So Ruby Sapphire, your best matchups are going to be into Ruby Amethyst. I think you're really kind of favored because you're going to get way ahead in ink before Ruby Amethyst is typically able to close out the game, and you're just going to take things over. If they can go heavy into Queen's Castle, sometimes that can be problematic, but as long as that doesn't happen, I think definitely Ruby Sapphire is favored in that matchup. And then into Amber Steel, because their wheels are ultimately going to be beneficial for you. If you guys aren't familiar with the terminology for wheel is how people refer to Whole New World, because there was a card in Magic the Gathering called Wheel of Fortune that did the exact same thing many years ago, so people just call it wheel instinctively. But Amber Steel, you may get kind of control in that early game, but you're not able to do any big hand disruption, so typically you're going to be looking at Ruby Sapphire getting way ahead of you on ink, blowing up your board, and then taking over going into the late game. Kind of the equal matchups I think are going to be into Sapphire Steel. That can really go either way. It just depends on who's getting their Tamatoas out and taking advantage of them sooner. And then into Emerald Steel, definitely a kind of 50-50 shot. If Emerald Steel is able to disrupt your hand heavily and make you discard a lot of cards before you're able to establish a lot of ink, probably not going to win that game. However, if you're able to get some card draw going and kind of stay ahead of them on that and then blow up their board, you're definitely going to take over the game going into the late game. So it could go either way. Keep in mind, set championships are going to be best of 2, so I think that's always relevant in making your decision. You want a deck that's going to win a lot of matchups on the play and on the draw. Some of these ink ramp decks will struggle on the draw, especially playing into discard. And then the matchups that I think are kind of weighted against you as the Ruby Sapphire player are going to be into Amber Emerald. Amber Emerald is the counter meta deck right now, so playing into Amber Emerald with this deck isn't the best feeling because they are just going to go ahead and snipe cards out of your hand like crazy with Bare Necessities and Ursula, and then possibly even be able to still wipe your board if they're able to take advantage of Kita and Under the Sea, and then establish a board of their own that's just going to overwhelm you with small characters. They're usually pretty high on lore before you're getting anywhere with lore, so that can be a tough matchup. And then Emerald Amethyst is the other big aggro deck. They're just able to come out of the gate swinging. They are still going to be able to make you do some light discard, so if they're able to take advantage of that, that can really disrupt your game plan. They are not able to rip your Fishbone Quills like they are with Amber with Bare Necessities, but they are still able to take your early game songs. If they're a savvy player, they're going to be looking at getting out in Ursula and ripping your one jump ahead as opposed to taking your removal too soon, so they can slow down your ink ramp and then take your removal potentially with another Ursula if they have something like that, or Singer Ursula with a sudden chill. So the next deck we're going to talk about is going to be Sapphire Steel. Deck that's near and dear to my heart, a deck that I am definitely leaning towards as a potential option to play for set championships. My build has changed quite a bit over time. I did take advantage of some of the set 4 cards and just changed a lot of cards out that I weren't seeing play in the deck previously going into this new meta because they have become a lot more relevant. But some of the stuff that we're running, our 1-drops are incredibly limited, but we are running 1 Fire the Cannons, 4 Popsicles, and 4 Fortispheres. I think Fire the Cannons is a pretty good tech option. It can be awesome to get that 2 damage for 1 ink, especially when you're not heavy on uninkables at that time. You are generally running less uninkables in this deck than you would be in Ruby Sapphire, so I think taking advantage of that is definitely worthwhile. Popsicle and Fortisphere speak for themselves. 1 cost inkable. When they come into play, they're going to draw you the card. That is the biggest thing. They are bait for Flaversham, essentially, so that you can banish an item and draw some cards when you're getting Flaversham into play. But Popsicle can also heal your characters, which is great onto something like Cogsworth when it's relevant, and Fortisphere can go ahead and give one of your characters Bodyguard, which can be good if you need it, but typically you're just going to be using these as Flaversham bait, so that's pretty much what they're here for. We do have Belle Strange with special, like I mentioned with the Ruby Sapphire deck. I do think she is a little less good in this deck. You're not getting to 10 ink as fast or beyond 10 ink as fast, typically because this deck is a little more aggro oriented, but Belle can be very good when she's good and can get you some sweet lore off of Lucky Dime, grabbing you 5, or if she is actually able to quest, getting you 5 that way, but that does not happen a lot, especially in a meta with Brawl. And we do have 4 Cogsworth, ever the staple in this deck, 2, 5 for 5, quest for 2. His shift has never been relevant because we still don't have a good Cogsworth shift target. I would love to see a steel Cogsworth that is decent, even like a 2/2 for 1 I think would be better than our current Cogsworth shift target, but he is going to give all of your characters resist +1, and he has ward, so he's incredibly difficult to remove, doesn't die to Brawl because he can't be targeted, so they are going to be looking at having to do a board wipe to get your Cogsworth off of the board. That is kind of why the Ruby Sapphire matchup is a little bit weird, because they can do a board wipe pretty early, so your Cogsworth may be less relevant in that matchup than it is in others. But we are also running 2 Beast Hard-Headed. So this is the one instance where I think this card is pretty good. It is a 4/4, so it keeps it out of range of Madame Medusa, out of range of Brawl, which is kind of the problem with Benja right now. They do both quest for 2, Beast costs 5, but the 4/4 stat line is definitely helpful for him. But he's going to come into play and banish an item, which is mostly what he's relevant for, to get your opponent's Lucky Dimes and Fishbone Quills potentially out of your way so that you can ink ramp faster than them and win the game. Much like Ruby Sapphire, we are on 1 Ariel. She's just uninkable. If the card was inkable, I think it would be possible to play more of them, but 3/4 ward, quest for 3, and if you have more items in play than your opponent, she is going to quest for 5. So taking advantage of with Lucky Dime, you can go ahead and close out the game within a couple turns, especially if you're questing in. Not always the best option to quest. Sometimes you just want to leave her up if you're so far ahead and just take advantage of her with Lucky Dime. Then getting into our last couple characters, I am on 3 Tinkerbell. I think there is an argument for 4 Tinkerbell. She is very good, but I went with 3. 4/5 stat line, again, very good. Keeps her out of the range of Madame Medusa, out of the range of Brawl. Obviously, if they are playing things like Fang Crossbow or Ice Block and they get a lot of Ice Blocks, they can still Ice Block her down and kill her with a Brawl, kill her with a Madame Medusa. So, you know, nothing is really safe unless it has ward. But she is going to come into play and deal 1 damage to every character, and I think even her better ability yet is her second ability, where when she attacks into something and banishes it, she is going to be able to do 2 damage to a target character, so that gets you around evasive in a lot of instances. And then we have Tamatoa as a 3 of in this deck. I think 4 of, there's definitely an argument for that, but I did go ahead and go with 3 of. This is heavy card draw with 3 whole new worlds in the deck, so it is quite possible to get your Tamatoas, even more so than it is with Ruby Sapphire. He's a 5/8, comes down for 8, and whenever he comes into play or quest, you can return an item from your discard back into your hand, and he gets +1 lore for each item that you have in play. So if you have a ton of items out, you are going to be able to blast in for a ton of lore or take advantage of a ton of lore with him with Lucky Dime. Then we're on 3 Babooms. I think Baboom is fantastic. Baboom is your answer in the Amber Steel Steelsong matchup to Cinderella. It's your answer to Diablo, so I think being on 3 Baboom is the right call. It's also why we have Fire the Cannons in the deck now. The 2 damage is super relevant, and Baboom is inkable, so I think 3 is the place to be right now with Baboom. And then again, we're looking at 4/1 jump ahead. Definitely the way to go. You want to be able to ramp that ink as fast as possible. 3 strength of a Raging Fire, just because there's not a ton of actual characters in this deck, so I didn't think it was prevalent to be on more than that, but still a very good card to go ahead and put some damage down. We have 4 How Far I'll Go, 2 Along Came Zeus, deal 5 damage to a character or location, 2 Let It Go to go ahead and get those characters out of your way that would be difficult to deal with otherwise, like Cinderella, the big shift Cinderella, which isn't quite as relevant in the meta as it used to be, but when you see it, you definitely want to have a Let It Go. Then you have 3 Whole New World to go ahead and refill your hands, blast out as much ink as possible with Fishbone Quill, and then Whole New World, get a new hand going. 2 Grab Your Swords to deal 2 damage to every character, 4 Fishbone Quills to ink ramp, and 2 Lucky Dimes to ramp ahead on that lore off of Tamatoa and Ariel and Belle, obviously. The matchups for this deck I think are the most favorable. That's why I'm leaning towards this deck as a potential option for set championships, but you are going to have a great matchup into Emerald Steel. Whole New World is definitely your answer to that deck. It is kind of difficult though, because you don't necessarily always want to keep it in your starting hand, because if they do hit you with something like Ursula and take it away from you, it can really cripple you going into the rest of the game, and they just end up beating you. So I do think in some instances the Emerald Steel player could be favored, so it just depends on if you're going first or second. But a Whole New World, definitely an answer for that deck, so it's a great option to have. Emerald Amethyst, you're going to be heavily favored because you have a ton of removal. Grab Your Swords just absolutely decimates that deck, so I think Emerald Amethyst is going to have a very tough time beating you unless they quest in super fast. Me is also a great answer to that. Baboom, Fire the Cannons, all the removal is just going to be really difficult for them to deal with. And then also Amber Emerald, kind of same thing. They're going to have a tough time taking advantage of Kita and Under the Sea. Even if they do get there, you're going to potentially be able to refill the board. You're going to be able to Whole New World. Again, they are potentially on Ursula, so they could rip the Whole New World from your hand, so that can make it difficult. But I do think Sapphire Steel is definitely favored in that matchup. I think Sapphire Steel has the most favorable matchups in the current meta. However, 2 of those favorable matchups are into off-meta decks, so a little bit interesting. I think Ruby Sapphire is pretty even because it just kind of depends on who gets there first with ink. And then the other even matchup is going to be into Amber Steel. Whoever's kind of Whole New Worlding and controlling the board first can definitely take the game away. Amber Steel, I think, is kind of even competitor with this deck. And then I think the toughest matchup potentially for Sapphire Steel in my opinion is Ruby Amethyst, coming down and take advantage of those locations early, just not being able to deal enough damage out to them, and then them just getting ahead and running away with it, taking advantage of Flynn if he doesn't die to Baboom. That's another reason Baboom is great in this deck, to get rid of Flynn. But I think Ruby Amethyst, at least in my experience, has a pretty good matchup into Sapphire Steel. I have won that matchup many times as a Ruby Amethyst player. But that is kind of the matchups and the deck breakdown for Sapphire Steel. And now we'll go ahead and jump into Bucky's Big Dumb Deck, as I call it. I don't love the Bucky deck list personally, but it is a pretty good deck. I have played this once at a tournament and I did come away with second. But basically, my deck list ran a little more heavy into the 1-drops. There are different versions of this deck list that don't run the 1-drop Pegasus. But I was on 4 Diablo to go ahead and look at my opponent's hand and to be a shift target for the bigger Diablo. Flynn Rider also to be a shift target, Pegasus as a shift target, and a great early game quester because he does have evasive. Robin Hood, shift target, as you may have guessed. Then we do have our 4 Buckies, which are going to go ahead and let you discard a card from your opponent's hand if you play a Floodborn, and it does have ward, so it's incredibly difficult for your opponent to deal with until they are able to do a board removal. It is a big reason people have been teching in the card Avalanche, also to deal with those locations. Maybe that's a good card to play in this build, or even in Sapphire Steel, but I think Grab Your Swords is maybe the better option in Sapphire Steel. Maybe in this deck, 1 Avalanche might be worthwhile. Then we are on 4 Ursula Deceiver to go ahead and rip those songs out of your opponent's hand. 1/3 for a 2 quest for 1, and takes a song from your opponent's hand when it comes into play. Do have 4 Diablos. When it is exerted, you are going to draw every time your opponent draws, which is just in reality ends up being pretty gross because you're drawing an absolute ton of cards. If you get 2 Diablos on the board, it can be incredibly overwhelming for your opponent super fast, so
it has been a massive answer for the card draw, and it can go ahead and come down on turn 2 with Bucky to start that discard engine even sooner, because its shift is going to be just to discard a song. So you get that turn 1 Diablo, play Bucky turn 2, shift Diablo turn 2. Can be gross, and can also make a situation where your opponent is actually going to want to out that for turn 1 Diablo, which can be interesting, because do they want to do that and take the advantage on card draw? Or do they want to go ahead and have it for when you play the other Diablo, which is just going to come down for turn 3 if you can't shift to turn 2. Aladdin can be absolutely disgusting if you're playing Ruby Sapphire or Sapphire Steel, because he's just going to banish the crap out of your item, so you are going to want to get him with a removal pretty much immediately when he comes onto the board. He does have to quest to do it, so it doesn't do it when he comes into play, but if he can get going, or if they can get a couple Aladdins going, they just absolutely decimate you as an item deck. He is fairly easy for you to out, especially for Ruby Sapphire, because Madame Medusa is going to deal with them, or Ice Block and Brawl. Then we have the 2 Flynn Riders, 4 cost uninkable, 2/3 quest for 4. He is evasive, and he has -1 for each card in your opponent's hand in terms of lore, so he is good in certain situations where he is able to come down and quest for 4. He does shift for 2, which is pretty great. Another turn 4 option, we are playing 3 Jafars, 3/4 quest for 1. The most interesting thing with Jafar is going to be his ability that when he attacks and banishes an opposing character, you are going to be able to draw a card, so that can definitely give you some additional card draw advantage. We are on 3 5-cost Pegasus, 3/3 quest for 2, evasive. A lot of people have dropped the shift target Pegasus, but the shift, I think, for 3 is super relevant. Can definitely help you take advantage of that Bucky going into turn 3, and when he shifts down, he can give all of your characters evasive until your next turn, so that can be really, really good. I think not having a shift target for him is a mistake, but some people have stepped away from it. Obviously, if your opponent is on Avalanche, that can be rough if you are running Pegasus and Bucky, because you're going to be losing more than one character. We are running 4 Beast Tragic Hero, again for card draw. As long as he doesn't have damage on him, he's going to draw you an additional card at the beginning of your turn. If he does have damage on him, he is going to get +4, so he's going to be a great way to out locations. He does cost 5, and he is a 3/5 stat line, so unfortunately he does die to Medusa, which is a little bit of a bummer with him. Another reason we are playing Hidden Cove in this deck, to try to push things outside of the range of Medusa and things like that. Quest for 2, you're probably not going to be questing with him unless you no longer need the card advantage, but great card, as evidenced by the price. This deck is incredibly expensive. And we have 4 Robin Hood, 3 sticks, quest for 2, shifts for 3, so another great option. Get that turn 1 Robin Hood down, turn 2 Bucky, turn 3 shift Robin Hood. Always a great option if they aren't outing your turn 1 Robin Hood pretty immediately. And whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you are going to gain 2 lore, so he doesn't even have to quest to gain his lore. And when he's banished in a challenge, he's going to draw a card and replace himself. So just a fantastic card still in the meta. Some people have mixed opinions on him. I think Robin Hood in the right deck is great. We're playing 2 Tinkerbell. We already talked about this with Sapphire Steel, but the biggest thing is it's going to deal 1 to everything when it comes down, and it is going to be able to deal 2 when it banishes something to get you around other evasive characters. We are on 4 Let the Storm Rage On to go ahead and draw your card and deal 2 damage to a character. Great option to sing with Diablo or with Aladdin, or even with some of your bigger shifters if you are in a better position to sing it. We have 3 Strength of a Raging Fire, again because you're not always going to have a board flooded with characters, but when you do, Strength of a Raging Fire can be excellent to deal a ton of damage. 3, we don't talk about Bruno for when you do have board control and you have discarded most of the cards in your hand. It no longer becomes random what they're discarding. You, in a lot of positions, can go ahead and bounce a character back to their hand with it, and they are just immediately discarding that character. 2 Grab Your Swords, primarily for the mirror match. Again, Grab Your Swords totally decimates this deck, deal 2 to all opposing characters. And Hidden Cove to give those characters +1/+1. So like I mentioned, if you get Beast on there, you can get him outside of the range of Medusa. Same thing with Pegasus, Jafar, Robin Hood. So there's a lot of characters that are really going to benefit from that, and even getting something like the small Robin Hood on there, Diablo on there, is going to keep them out of the range of Brawl, so that can be very good. Hidden Cove is a little easy to out, especially when something like Maui is going to blast away in one shot, but when it's good, and that's Bucky's big dumb deck. I played this deck Again, I just don't love the way that it plays. It is definitely good. It's effective. It wins games. It's got a lot of good matchups. I think against Ruby Sapphire, it is definitely favored if you are able to discard a lot of their cards right away. Could be an even matchup, but you could be favored if you're playing it right. Ruby Amethyst, I think you're pretty favored. They are not going to be drawing as many cards as Ruby Sapphire, Sapphire Steel, or Amber Steel in a lot of situations. They are going to be drawing a lot, but you can still get ahead of that if you're making them discard aggressively and early. Emerald Amethyst, you have a great matchup because you do have the removal options as well as an aggressive discard package, and they are going to struggle a little bit more with that card draw as opposed to some of the other decks, so can definitely be in your favor. In some of the more even matchups, I think Amber Steel is pretty even. Anything that's going to be playing a whole new world into discard is going to be tough for you because they're going to just be able to go ahead and refill their hand. And the matchup into Amber Emerald, I think, is pretty even. If they are able to get to a point where they are going to go Kita into Under the Sea, or even if they Under the Sea without Kita, it can remove a lot of your board. So that can be rough for you. And they have some discard options of their own, so they can be kind of counter discarding you. And then last but certainly not least, your worst possible matchup is going to be in a Sapphire Steel. Sapphire Steel, I think, is very much favored in this situation to just be able to go ahead and kind of whole new world their way out of the situation and then take advantage of much larger characters than you're going to be playing in Emerald Steel. So that is Bucky's Big Dumb deck. Then a deck that is near and dear to my heart, it's a deck that I still think is fantastic is Ruby Amethyst Control. I am playing some off-meta options in my build, but we are looking at 4 Turnbox Followers whenever this card is questing in, and it's going to be an unfavorable board position. You're going to be getting it banished by something that it's not going to be able to banish back. You are going to want to go ahead and just banish it when it quests to draw a card, so that is the best way to take advantage of it. Magic Broom, when you play another character, you're going to be able to banish it and draw a card. Again, typically going to want to do this after a quest and it's in an unfavorable board position. Kuzco, a 2-cost 1/2. Whenever this character is banished, you are going to be able to go ahead and draw a card. I think that's a great option. It does cost 2. We did cut down to 3 of them from 4 as we were playing in the last set because Flynn Rider Frenemy came out. We had to fit in 4 of those. It's a big reason you're also seeing people cut to 3 snakes in this deck now, as we have here 3/3 for 2, quest for 1, and when it comes into play you can bounce another character to your hand or go ahead and banish it. Obviously Kuzco, Magic Broom, Flynn Rider, Turnbox Followers, these aren't necessarily cards you want to bounce, but you don't want to get rid of Madam Mim because she is going to be fantastic with Merlin Rabbit, Merlin Goat, Merlin Crab, Lady Tremaine, so many things. So Madam Mim is still definitely here for the late game, but she isn't necessarily a character you're looking to play on turn 2 like you used to be with this deck. Flynn Rider Frenemy, I think everybody's familiar with this guy, but he's going to start gathering you up some lore as long as you do have a character with the highest attack on the board. He does only cost 2 to bring down. He does die to things like Baboom, Teeth, and Ambitions if they're on that type of build. Does die to Brawl, so he is pretty easy to out, but if he can get going and even net you lore for a couple turns, he can really kind of push you ahead early in the game. Madam Mim Fox, always a fantastic option to blow away any of those early game targets. Does deal with the countering Sisus, which we are going to talk about here in a second. So Madam Mim Fox, still fantastic, bouncing a character back to your hand and able to attack for 4 with Rush for only 3. Maleficent Sorceress is a card that has come back around in this deck in the current meta. I think drawing cards is very relevant, especially if you are going in that Bucky matchup. You just want to be really aggressive on card draw really early to try to keep parity, because they are going to be probably making you discard before you can get to something like Be Prepared or even Be King Undisputed to go ahead and get that Bucky off of the field. Then we do have 3 Merlin Crab, 3/3 for 3, quest for 1. When it comes into play, it's going to be able to give something Challenger 3. It's going to do it again when it leaves play, so it's a great option with something like Turnbox Followers, Magic Broom, Kuzco, some of your early stuff that is only attacking for 1. Even with Maleficent Sorceress, it is going to be able to give them enough attack to be able to make a relevant play at getting something out of your way. Then we do have Sisu, Emboldened Warrior, I believe is this one. 3 cost, 1/4, quest for 2, and is going to have bonus to its attack equal to the number of cards in your opponent's hand. Does typically put it out of the range of things like Brawl, Medusa, etc., because your opponent is typically going to have cards in their hand. Sometimes they can just dump their hand out so that she gets very weak and then blow her away, but a lot of times your opponent isn't going to be in a position where that's something that they want to do. Maybe. But Sisu is very good in the current meta, and she is inkable, so when she's not good, put her in the ink well. Tuk Tuk, a card I've been hot on since the set came out. I really don't think this card gets as much love as it deserves, but it is a 2/3 for 3, quest for 1. It is evasive, so it's going to be a great answer to Diablo in a favorable way. And when it comes into play, not an irrelevant ability, go ahead and move one of your other characters into a location, and that character is going to get +2 attack. So just really good. It is my understanding you do have to move one of your characters into a location for them to get that +2 attack, so it's all or nothing ability in that regard. But you do also move him into that location, so if you do have your 1 RLS Legacy out, or even a Queen's Castle out, it's a great way to put the pressure on for that card draw and really make them have to choose if they need to out your Queen's Castle or try to get rid of your characters. We do have 3 goats, so we did cut down the goat package by 1 with the reduction of the Madam Mims. I also thought it was really important to still go ahead and get 3 rabbits into this deck. So goat, when he comes down, is going to get you a lore. When he leaves, he's going to get you a lore. Merlin rabbit, when he comes down, he's going to draw you a card, and same thing when he leaves. So they're both great ways to keep the pressure on, keep the card draw up into that Emerald Steel matchup. Then we do have 4 Mauis. I've said it once, I'll say it 100 times. Best attacker in the game, 6'5" with Rush. The Reckless doesn't even matter in my opinion, because he is just so aggressive. He's going to be doing what he needs to do when he comes onto board. So them controlling you with Reckless and making you take unfavorable attacks is unlikely. Lady Tremaine is a card I'm still hot on. Some people would say you should play Madame Medusa instead. Maybe they're right. I still think playing a Tremaine and then shifting on a Tremaine and then bouncing them back to your hand with the Fox or the Snake and then playing them down again is just absolutely aggressive and super controlling in the late game. So I still think she's very good. I think she's the right choice over Madame Medusa, but not everybody agrees with that opinion. But 3, 4, 4, 6, quest for 2, that's another thing that she has over Madame Medusa. She quest for 2 and not 1. Her shift is irrelevant, but when she comes into play, your opponent is going to banish a character of their choice and not of your choice, so this can deal with things that have ward potentially. Especially if you're in a position against Sapphire Steel or something where they go into a turn, they're like, oh, I put out just my aerial. You go ahead and get that out of your way with Tremaine. Brawl, banish an opposing character with 2 or less attack. Necessary evil at this point in the format, in my opinion. Then we do have 4 friends on the other side to go ahead and draw you 2 cards. 3 Bee King Undisputed, do the same thing as Lady Tremaine, banish a character of your opponent's choice as a 4-cost song, so your 4-cost or above characters are going to be able to go ahead and sing this. Great option for Maui if they are trying to make you take a negative reckless attack. You can go ahead and sing Bee King Undisputed with him instead, or sing Friends on the other side with him to keep him from having to take a negative attack. And the last few cards we're going to be talking about are Be Prepared. Definitely a card that some people are considering a staple in the meta right now. It is going to be a 7-cost, banish all characters. I think if you're playing Lorcana, you're pretty familiar with this card already. Most people are saying you definitely need 4 of in the deck. I am on 2 personally, but be prepared for people to be running more than 2 Be Prepared. No pun intended. And the last couple cards, I'm running a couple locations in the deck. I do have 4 Queen's Castle. I think Queen's Castle is a definite 4 of in the meta right now. Lots of decks have a hard time outing it. Bucky has a very hard time dealing with it, so it can be super aggressive to get you a lot of lore, and if you can get some characters into it that aren't getting banished by direct removal, you can go ahead and get some extra card draw, which can just give you a huge advantage. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to be drawing those cards if something like Diablo's on the board, but you do have ways to out Diablo, such as Brawl. The last card in the deck, also a location. I am playing 1 RLS Legacy. Some people may say this is a mistake without Jim Hawkins. I'm not super hot on Jim Hawkins. I think he's really funny in that Just in Time deck that just came out, which if you want to hear me talk about that, we definitely do a deck breakdown on that. I think that's a deck I do want to check out. It's very interesting, but pretty funny deck. But RLS Legacy, great location, gonna net you 2 lore. It does have 8 willpower, which I think is super relevant. You'd be surprised how often the attack that your opponent has is going to be for 7, and RLS Legacy is going to be able to survive through that and net you some extra lore. It's obviously not going to have the benefit like Queen's Castle to be drawing you cards, but getting that 2 lore and having that 8 willpower is great, and I wasn't on too many uninkables in this build, I thought, so I was able to squeeze 1 RLS Legacy in there. But that's what I'm looking at for Ruby Amethyst. I think some of your best matchups
are going to be into Amber Emerald and Sapphire Steel, into Amber Emerald, they are going to be able to take away some of your stuff if they are playing Bare Necessities and Ursula, which can definitely be tough, but you can just draw so many cards that you can get ahead of them. So even if they're wiping your board, you're wiping their board back and then just reestablishing with bigger characters. And Sapphire Steel, the way that I'm playing this deck, I think is a pretty favorable matchup. Typically you can rush out a lot of cards from your hand and a Whole New World will be just as good for you as it is for your opponent. Some of your even matchups, Emerald Steel could go either way. Again, if they get you discarding super early, it's going to be rough for you, but if you're able to get that card draw going before they're getting you discarding, and then you're able to remove their Diablos with Brawl and stuff like that, you could definitely get ahead. Flynn and Sisu are also great in that matchup, but you do want to be able to play out some of your other characters to soak up some of their direct removal before you're getting those Flynn's on board. Also, I think the Amber Steel matchup, again, because you can kind of rush guys out onto the board and stifle card draw if you want to. You do have some triggers where it is may draw cards, so you could actually decline that if you wanted to, if you think a Whole New World or something is coming up and the cards aren't going to be beneficial to you before that. Obviously, declining draw triggers is not something that is recommended, but there could be situations where it's beneficial, like if you're facing an opposing Sisu. And then Emerald Amethyst, I think the matchup is really in the favor of the Ruby Amethyst control deck. I actually played Emerald Amethyst against Emerald Amethyst that league today with this Ruby Amethyst list, and I 2-0'd them pretty aggressively. Like, it really wasn't even close. They didn't have a great solution for Flynn. They befuddled it to my hand and then didn't get much traction after that. And then the biggest matchup I think is really tough, I think is favored to the other deck. Some people would disagree with that, is Ruby Sapphire. I think Ruby Sapphire is really tough for this deck because you're both kind of pushing into the mid to late game for control, but they're going to ink so many cards. They're going to have way more ink than you, and that should ultimately give them the lead. They're still going to be able to do a lot of removal to you. They have one-sided removal now with the big Sisu, which can be pretty devastating. Obviously, it doesn't deal with everything in the deck, but it deals with most of the characters in this deck, so that is definitely a tough matchup for this deck. That's Ruby Amethyst control. Then we're going to get outside of what I consider kind of the top 4 meta. So those decks are the ones previously that I would definitely say are going to be the top 4 decks to play. If you want to hear more thoughts about deck building and how I kind of start out designing a deck in general, definitely make sure you're jumping into the Patreon. I'm going to be doing a Patreon exclusive video very soon where I kind of break down how I build a deck and how I approach it. I know a lot of people who are playing this game, this is their first card game, so you're basically pulling a deck list off of the internet and using that yourself. It's not always a great strategy in my opinion, because you aren't always going to end up with something that is going to be beneficial to you. Some people play cards a certain way, some people play them a different way, and what's good for one person isn't always great for somebody else. So if you don't understand the deck list, it's going to be tough for you. So being able to make those kind of educated decisions yourself and understand what you're going for, what you're building towards, what your goal is with that specific deck is super important. But we'll talk about that more on the Patreon. As a reminder, all Patreon donations go directly back to the channel in the form of giveaways. So if you've ever supported the Patreon, thank you so much. You are the reason we are able to give away booster boxes and stuff. And if you haven't subscribed and dropped any comments, now is a great time to do so. We are coming up on that 1,500 subscriber booster box giveaway. But without any further ado, we're going to get into the last 3 decks, starting with Steelsong Amber Steel. Still a relevant deck to this game. This list is maybe pretty different than I think what you'll necessarily see. This is a little off brand. I'm a little off kilter, doing some weird stuff with my Steelsong list, but you know, other people may be on a different type of build. But as always, as you'd expect in Steelsong, we are running 4 Cinderella. I think it's a bad time for Cinderella in the fact that Baboom exists. Baboom is really rough. I think there may even be an argument for cutting to 3 Cinderella, but then you're on the other end of things where she's just really good with Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of a Raging Fire, and all that good kind of stuff. Being able to sing those cards is incredibly relevant. Then we are playing 2 Golden Harp. This is one of those kind of off-meta choices that I made with this deck. Not everybody's going to like this card. It's not something that you typically want to be playing turn 1, but if you are going turn 1 Cinderella, turn 2 even like Golden Harp, and then singing a song to remove their character off the board, you're now in a position where you could quest for 5 going into turn 3, which is pretty gross. And the being able to sing a song on turn 3 again, if your Cinderella is staying on the board, is highly likely. Or if you're able to get an aerial developed going into turn 3, also you can start setting up for your 5-cost songs going forward from that and keeping those Golden Harps on the board.
Next in the 1-drop slot, we do have the Queen, 1 cost uninkable, 2/2 shift target for the big queen, everybody knows her, and Robin Hood, same deal. Then I am running 2 Ursulas as a shift target. She has a 1/4 Singer 4, so I don't think that's irrelevant. With a cost of 2, she is able to come down and sting those Along Came Zeuses, of which we are running 3 in this deck, so definitely great for that. And she is another 2-drop. We only had 4 Smees in this deck and nothing else in the 2-drop slot other than Bare Necessities, which typically you want to be able to sing, so I thought adding Ursula in was a fun choice. And then we do have the 4 Aerials, everybody knows her, 3 cost, inkable, 2/3, quest for 1. When she comes down, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, choose a song and put it in your hand. Always great. And she is going to have that Singer 5, which is going to help you get off the Whole New World, grab your swords when your hand starts getting low. Rapunzel for additional card draw, also a reason we're playing Golden Harp and Ursula. They are great additional targets for Rapunzel to be able to go ahead and heal 3, because they actually do have enough willpower to get 3 damage onto them. Obviously Smee is very synergistic with Rapunzel. And we do have the shift Ursula, discard a song to shift her, 2/4 cost uninkable, quest for 2, but you shift to discard a song, and whenever she's questing in, it's just absolutely gross for your opponent. You get to go ahead and look at their hand and rip a non-character card from it, so you can start taking those locations, those items, and those songs. Then the next up, jumping into our 5 cost characters, we do have 3 Queen. Great thing with the Queen, she shifts for 2, she has a 4/3, so she is out of the range of Medusa and Brawl and all that good stuff. Does quest for 2, and whenever she quests, you're able to give one of your opposing characters -4 attack, one of your characters +4 attack, and really take a favorable attack, which is always fantastic. And then 4 Robin Hoods, you love him, you know him, 5 cost, inkable, quest for 2, 3/6 on the stat line, shifts for 3. Whenever he goes ahead and banishes a character, he is going to go ahead and net you 2 lore, which is wonderful because it means you don't have to quest with him to be able to still get that 2 lore. So generally you're going to want to be attacking with Robin Hood. And then whenever he is banished in a challenge, you're going to go ahead and draw a card, so he's going to replace himself unless your opponent's removing him with direct removal. He does die to Medusa, which is rough, but if you're shifting him out on 3, Medusa is a distant thought at that point, so he's able to put in some work before she comes down typically. Then we do have the 3/8 Aerial, Sonic Warrior quest, and she's going to be able to go ahead and shift in. Does cost 6, but shifts for less, is inkable, quest for 2. Whenever you play a song card, you can go ahead and pay 2 to deal 3 damage, or pay 3 to deal, I think pay 2 to deal 3 damage if I'm not mistaken. And then we are running 2 of the big Cinderella Stout-Hearted, quest for 3, 7 cost, but it's a 5/5, is going to go ahead and shift for 5, so you can get it out for less than 7 if you do have that small Cinderella as a target for her. And whenever you sing a song, she can attack readied characters, and she does have resist 2, which is incredibly relevant because she has to get hit for 7 to go ahead and go down, and she is going to resist each instance of damage individually. So grab your swords does nothing to her, let the storm rage on does nothing to her. She is typically a card that is incredibly difficult for your opponent to remove. She's also a big reason that I advocate for Fang Crossbow inside of the Ruby Sapphire list, because you are going to be able to go ahead and Fang Crossbow her down to 3 and then get a Madame Medusa down to get her off of the field that way, which is always great. 3 Bare Necessities, again, to rip out those Fishbone Quills, to get rid of some of those songs if that's what's going to be more relevant when you're playing against what's going to be a ton of Sapphire decks potentially at your set championships. 2 World's Greatest Criminal Minds to deal with opposing Cinderellas, which aren't going to be as common, but moreover to deal with the Tamatoas in the Sapphire matchup. Can deal with Maui in the Ruby matchup, which is a lot of what you're going to be seeing in the Emerald Steel matchup. It's pretty much just going to be ink in your deck. It's really not going to do anything to their deck. That's why we're only running 2. Then we have 4 Let the Storm Rage On, deal 2 and draw a card, 3 cost uninkable, sing for 3. Obviously great fodder for Cinderella at the beginning of the game and able to replace itself. Always great when you're drawing a card, when you're playing a card. And Strength of Raging Fire, go ahead and deal damage for each character you haven't played to an opposing character. Big reason in our build that we are on 13 1-drops and 6 2-drops, because we are going to be able to flood the board a little bit more and take advantage of those Strength of Raging Fires. As I mentioned, we're on 3 Along Came Zeus, deal 5 damage to a character or location, 3 Whole New World to go ahead and replenish our hands. I do think there's an argument for playing 4, but I wanted to keep the list tight, so I went with 3 instead. And then 4 Grab Your Swords to deal 2 damage to each opposing character. Some people may argue play 4 Whole New World, 3 Grab Your Swords, but I think the chances of your opponent playing Whole New World is likely, and Sapphire Steel is Sapphire Steel is one of those more even matchups, so letting them Whole New World instead of you Whole New Worlding is great. Some of your better matchups are going to be into Emerald Steel because you are playing Whole New World, so you're going to be able to replenish your hand even if they made you do some discard, as long as you are able to still get a Whole New World into your hand or take advantage of it during the game. Emerald Amethyst is going to have a very tough time against this deck because they really don't have a lot of removal. They have a lot of low willpower characters, and you have a lot of direct damage cards. Is another matchup where World's Greatest Criminal Mind isn't going to do you much good, but your other removal is going to be fantastic. And then Amber Emerald is probably going to struggle against you again because you're going to be able to just remove their characters. They are also playing a lot of low willpower characters, and they don't have a lot of removal. As far as the matches that I think are going to be close, Sapphire Steel I think is going to be a pretty even matchup into you. You're just kind of deciding who's going to wheel first. Them playing Cogsworth is kind of rough for you, so you do want to be able to come in and go pretty aggressive. Again, why I'm playing heavy into the 1 and 2 cost line. Ruby Amethyst is generally going to be a pretty even matchup. It just depends on what you're able to do. If you're able to establish board with this deck and start singing Whole New World, singing some of your other big songs, it's going to be a feel bad for them, but Ruby Amethyst can sometimes be in a position where they're able to keep your board pretty clear, and if they're doing that effectively, it may be a little bit tougher. So I'd say that's a pretty even matchup. And the only matchup I think is really going to be tough for you with this deck is going to be into Ruby Sapphire. I think Ruby Sapphire is pretty equal to potentially favored against the Steelsong deck. You may really not have a bad matchup, but it really, again, just depends on how aggressive you're able to come down right in the early game and get out there before they're able to be prepared, wipe your board, and start reestablishing. This deck is steering a little more into some card draw options like Rapunzel, due to that specific fact, to be able to go ahead and potentially replenish your board post Be Prepared. But that's kind of the matchups for Steelsong, and then we'll jump into our last two deck lists. So we're looking at Emerald, Amethyst, Aggro. Again, I think this is a great deck. It is a little low to the ground. Steel matchup can be tough, but we're running 2 Turn Box Followers. When this character quests, you can go ahead and banish it and draw a card 2-1 for 1, so it's a great way to put the pressure on something like Flynn Frenemy, which is maybe going to be trying to gain lore off of himself in that first turn, but Turn Box Followers can prevent that from happening with the 2 attack stat line, which is definitely relevant right now, and does prevent them from taking a favorable attack in with Flynn if they wanted to. Curse Merfolk, 1 cost 0/1, quest for 2. When it's banished in a challenge, your opponent is going to discard a card, which is always a feel bad for them. Then we do have 4 Diablos as a shift target, also as a way to look at your opponent's hand and decide if Ursula Deceiver is going to be beneficial for you. We have 3 Pegasus as a quick evasive character to go ahead and net you some early game lore. Madam Mims to jump in and bounce something back to your hand if that's what's going to be most relevant for you, and establish a 3/3 threat onto the board. Flynn Rider, a 1/2 for 2, quest for 2, same ability as Curse Merfolk, going to go ahead and let you make your opponent discard if he's banished in a challenge. We got that Ursula to snipe songs from our opponent's hand. We have the Madam Mim Fox, again, to bounce and be pretty aggressive with 4 attack. Definitely a great card to go ahead and establish in the early game. It can also make it difficult for your opponent to take advantage of Flynn Frenemy and Sisu, especially because you're getting your hand out pretty quick with this deck. Typically aren't going to have enough cards in your hand for them to have enough power on Sisu for her to outpower Mim Fox. Also, Mim Fox is a favorable trade into Sisu. And Merlin, we have 2 Merlin Crabs as a great way to boost up those early game characters. Nobody's ever expecting to have their character killed by a Turn Box Followers or Curse Merfolk, Diablo, Pegasus, but sometimes that is going to be the relevant play. Maybe not always with Curse Merfolk, but you can get that Merlin down, go ahead and give something Challenger 3 and get a favorable attack. Also, a 3/3 stat line for 3 is pretty solid on an inkable card. We do have the legendary Diablo 2/2 quest for 1, shifts by discarding an action card, of which we don't have a ton in this deck. We are running 10 total action cards in this deck, so you may not always be taking advantage of that shift line, although you may be able to sometimes if it's relevant. Really, it's more so looking at the card with the Diablo in the early game, and whenever Diablo is exerted, when your opponent draws a card, you can go ahead and draw a card, and he is evasive, which is fantastic. We do have Jacques. When he comes into play, you can give an opposing character Reckless. Obviously, that's great if you have Curse Merfolk or Flynn on the board to give an opposing character Reckless, make them attack into them, make your opponent discard. We have the Ursula Deceiver of All, 2/3 for 3, quest for 1, but you're typically not going to be questing her with her. You're going to be singing one of these cards, either Sudden Chill, Mother Knows Best or Friends on the Other Side to bounce 2 cards, discard 2 cards, or draw 4 cards. So she's pretty cool. A lot of times she can be ink if you're just trying to be more aggressive with the questing. 2 Merlin Goats to sneak out that extra lore. 2 Merlin Rabbits to grab those extra cards. 2 Pegasus to protect your field by making them evasive. 2 of the Ursula Sea Witch Queen to protect you from your opponent singing songs and just to be a huge freaking threat. 4/7 that quests for 3 and prevents your opponent singing and exerts stuff when it quests is freaking fantastic. 2 Befuddles to kind of control the tempo in the early game. 2 Sudden Chills to get some discard. 4 Friends on the Other Side to keep up with that draw. 2 Mother Knows Best to bounce characters, preferably with Ursula Sea Witch Queen. 2 Hidden Coves to keep you out of the reach of Brawl, Sisu, all that kind of stuff, Madame Medusa. You can go ahead and protect some of the characters in this deck. And then we do have 3 of the Queen's Castle to hopefully get you some extra card draw if it doesn't get outed right away, and to net you some extra lore if it's able to stay on the field. Probably your best potential matchup with this particular deck is going to be into Ruby Sapphire, because you can go super aggressive in the early game. You can get some discard on them, which really kind of slows them down. But really, you can just get so far ahead on lore, they can't do anything about it. Ruby Sapphire also can typically struggle with the Queen's Castle if they haven't established an aggressive board. Some of your more even matchups, Ruby Amethyst could really go either way. It depends on who's more aggressive early. Them having removal is going to be difficult for you. Getting Be Prepared never feels good. But Queen's Castle is a good way to play against, play around, be prepared, and still keep the pressure on if your opponent doesn't have the characters already on the board to out it. Amber Emerald, I think, is pretty even. Obviously, if they are able to establish a Kita, or even sometimes without a Kita, because your characters are so low in the attack range, and they are able to go ahead and sing Under the Sea, you're able to put a lot of your characters on the bottom of your deck, which is never going to feel good. So if they are able to get that line out, it's not going to be great for you, and it is going to be easier for them to do it because you really don't have the removal to stop their shift targets. Some of your worst matchups are going to be into really anything steel. So Sapphire Steel is going to be rough because they're going to have a lot of removal. Emerald Steel is going to be super rough, and Amber Steel is going to be really rough again because they're all playing stuff like Grab Your Swords. That direct removal is going to be really difficult. If Bucky's able to make you discard as well, that's going to be really tough for you because you don't establish a lot of draw immediately with this deck. It kind of comes more into those turn 3, turn 4 plays. Emerald Steel is definitely a tough matchup for that reason. Whole New World feels pretty good for you, so playing into the Sapphire Steel or Amber Steel matchup, if they do potentially Whole New World and you don't have a bunch of cards in your hand, can actually be pretty beneficial for you with this deck, but you still really have to be super aggressive to get there. And if they pull something like Grab Your Swords, it wipes a lot of the cards in this deck off the board. They're drawing a lot of cards, and they don't necessarily have the best ways to deal with evasive. So if you're able to establish a Diablo or two, that can potentially put you in a better position, but those steel matchups are going to be really tough for this deck. Then the last deck we're going to talk about, probably the furthest off meta option, but a deck that I think is fantastic. I made a video on it before. If you haven't seen that, definitely go check it out. But it's going to be this Amber Emerald discard songs deck. We are on 2 Cinderella. We already talked about her. Singer 3, 4 Kita as a 2/2 shift target for 1, 4 Curse Merfolk, 4 Flynn, 4 Ursula Deceivers. Kind of similar to the last deck we just looked at, where they're just going to be heavy questers, making your opponent discard 4 Aerials to go ahead and get that Singer 5 going. Fantastic for, we don't talk about Bruno. It's cool for Mother Knows Best. It's good as a partial portion of the singing for Under the Sea and for Look at This Family. We do have 2 Cloud Kicker, obviously able to take advantage of Kita's shift line to bounce something back to your opponent's hand. 4 Prince John to get you that card draw off of your opponent discarding, which they are going to do pretty frequently. This deck is pretty heavy into discard. 4 Ursula Deceiver of All to be able to go ahead and sing multiple times, Bare Necessities, Sudden Chill, and Mother Knows Best to really just make your opponent discard like crazy. 2 Daisy Duck, again as a discard. She is going to be a discard when she enters play trigger. 2/3 for 4 Quest for 1, so she's kind of a weird stat line. Sometimes she's just ink in the inkwell, but if your opponent has 1 card in your hand and you think in their hand and you think it's something that's going to matter to them, Daisy can really come out and kind of surprise them and get that devastation and establish a character at the same time. Kita is a 5-cost 3/5 quest for 2, shifts for 3, and when she does come into play, she's going to give all characters -3, so keep in mind that is affecting your characters as well. So if you have any beneficial attacks to take advantage of beforehand, definitely make sure you're doing that. Then getting Kita on the board is generally going to protect you from an attack, but obviously since Under the Sea came out, she's going to be able to sing Under the Sea and generally wipe everything on your opponent's board short of like a Maui or Maleficent Dragon. Then we do have 1 Chernabog, 10 cost, 9/9, quest for 3, cost 1 less for every character in your discard pile, which isn't irrelevant because you have a lot of characters that are probably going to end up there. And when he comes into play, you're going to be able to shuffle all those characters back into your deck. A card I think has fallen out of the favor somewhat in the meta is going to be You Have Forgotten Me. 4 cost, inkable action. It is not a song, and I think that's why it's not getting more love, but each opponent discards 2 cards. This may be ink a lot of the time, but if your opponent is going into their turn 4 and they have 2 cards in their hand and you play You Have Forgotten Me and rip both of those cards out of their hand, that is going to slow them down and devastate their game plan so significantly that I think it's worth mentioning and worth playing. Bare Necessities, 2 cost action. Go ahead and rip a non-character card. Again, this is a great way to take Fishbone Quills, to take Lucky Dimes away from your opponents, to get rid of those Queen's Castles before they're able to be played. Singing it is obviously going to be ideal, which you can do with Cinderella, or even going Ursula Deceiver to look at their hand, ripping a song out of it, hopefully, and then finding out if they have something that's going to be favorable for you to sing Bare Necessities early, or getting Deceiver of All on the board and double singing it. Sudden Chill, again, to hopefully get that double discard with Deceiver of All. Mother Knows Best to hopefully get that double bounce with Deceiver of All. We don't talk about Bruno. Really great card. If you're able to discard their hand down to nothing, it's just a way to get a character off of the board and into the discard pile. It's essentially direct removal on any character. Bounces the character to their hand and they discard at random. Ariel can sing it because it costs 5. Look at This Family, I think, is a pretty fun option, especially if you're able to group sing it with Ursula Deceiver of All, because it's going to put it back on the bottom of your deck. You're going to look at the top 5 of your cards, top 5 cards of your deck, put 2 characters into your hand, and then if you sang it with Deceiver of All, you're going to do that again. So you're going to be looking at the top 10 cards of your deck, putting 4 characters in your hand, which is just an absolute ton of card draw. And her and Ariel put together can sing this, or her and maybe like Daisy Duck. The last card in the deck, and kind of what the deck is built around, is Under the Sea. Sing together for 8 and put all opposing characters with 2 or less attack on the bottom of their deck in any order. Again, if you get Key to down, you do the Key to shift line, and then you sing Under the Sea, it's gonna hit everything except for pretty much Maui and Maleficent Dragon. Maybe there's some other stuff I'm not thinking of that's meta relevant, but definitely let me know in the comments below if I'm missing something. Probably your best matchup is going to be into Ruby Sapphire because you are so aggressive. Maybe into Emerald Amethyst, you may have a little bit of a benefit because you can Under the Sea everything onto the bottom of their deck. Under the Sea is also really good against Bucky, but they can make you discard faster than you make them discard sometimes, so that may be a little more of an even matchup. And we would say Sapphire Steel is going to be rough, again, because they have the removal and you don't. So they're going to be blowing away your characters unless you're able to go ahead and make them discard that stuff before they do it. Obviously, Ursula is great to deal with Grab Your Swords, so you're at least preventing that from happening. Ruby Amethyst is going to be a bit of a tough matchup for this deck because they're going to draw so many resources that even if you're making them discard, they're still just going to be able to keep up and keep destroying your characters, which can be tough. And if they get a Be Prepared off against you, it's going to be super, super hard to reestablish because you just don't have as much card draw. And then the last deck that's going to be tough for you is going to be against Amber Steel, again, because they're going to have that removal and they're going to have Whole New World to go ahead and replenish their hand even if you've been able to make them discard through it. So there's a lot of kind of give and take matchups. What would I play going into set championships? Probably either Ruby Amethyst or Sapphire Steel. That's definitely what I'm considering. I do actually have a set championship coming up this next Sunday. I didn't sign up for 1,000,000 of them this time. I'm not as worried about getting an Ursula Sea Witch Queen enchanted. I think it would be cool to have, but I'm not as worried about it. If I get one, I get one. I'll be playing in 2 set championships over the course of the month. May sign up for another one at some point. Who knows? But if you're enjoying this video, definitely drop a like below, drop a comment to let me know what deck you're going to be playing at set championships. Is it going to be one of these, or is it going to be something off meta? If so, I'd love to hear about it. Make sure you're getting subscribed to get entered into that giveaway. Like I mentioned, we're only a couple hundred subscribers away from giving away another booster box of Into the Inkland, so very excited about that. And thank you guys so much again to take the time to support the Patreon. And remember, when you see those toys, video games, and the 7 best decks in Lorcana off in the distance, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.